Copyright avoiding intro music. Hi did it hi did it hi did I die did I hi did it hi did it hi die die yeah die did it die hi did it die did it die hi did it die did it die. Experimental podcast number 1, recorded live in Eretz Yisrael, live in the land of Israel. Hi, this is Reb Akiva. I'm here with my daughter Fayga. We're speaking on Erev Yesod Sheba Yesod, which is also a special day for visiting Yosef Tzaddik, the biblical patriarch Joseph. And as a matter of fact, Fayga is leading a tour group to the kever, the tomb of Yosef Tzaddik, the tomb of Joseph, biblical patriarch, this evening, which is located in Shechem, in the city of Nablus. A very special trip is arranged. It has to be arranged with IDF protection. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your trip you're going to lead tonight?
I'm leading a bus of about 50 people, though I've had requests for so much more.
Yeah, your phone's been ringing all day. Like, can I bring a friend? Can I bring 6 more people?
You know they limited the amount of buses for your Yosef Yesod this year. There's only 45 going in instead of the normal 70. One time a year they allow in the most amount of buses is your Yosef Yesod, which is 70 buses compared to, let's say, the normal 25, 30 they allow in every month.
And in the midst of Yesod Sheba Yesod, what do we have? An Israeli government functional failure.
Well, isn't it perfect? I'm going to the king of Egypt, so it works out, right?
Yeah, that in the midst of following an election, which seemed to have a pretty clear mandate for parties on the right, combined with the religious supporting parties, that one of the parties on the right decided he's not going to be involved, he's not going to join, and rather than allow the leftists to get involved and try and create a government, they decided to dissolve the Knesset to force new elections to prevent the left actually.
Well, do you really think Lieberman is a rightist?
Well, I mean, again, in Israel, defining what's a leftist and what's a rightist is an interesting topic. It's quite different from what's a leftist or a rightist in America. I mean, most of what you call a rightist in Israel, and maybe that way from conservative-ish, support-ish for religious causes, and conservative-ish moral causes, and a stronger security posture. But it would not involve lowering taxes, or, as you would say in the States, or a significant reduction in government involvement in the economy in the portions that they're involved. Taxes in Israel are significantly higher than in the U.S.
That's true.
And that's not the platform of any of the parties on the right. There was a micro party that tried to get in that had some of those policies. That was Zehut.
Oh, yeah.
And they failed.
Listen, I was really hoping we wouldn't reach here. I personally run the Engel department of the Otzma Yehudit Party.
So what was the failure?
The failure was that Lieberman wouldn't budge on the Chok HaGiyus, the draft law, and the Haredim wouldn't budge, but I think it was more the issue of what Lieberman's stance is compared to what UTJ's stance is, or even Shas.
Well, so part of the question is, how do we keep getting back to this topic? I actually read a news article a moment ago that says they're protesting the draft law in Mea Shearim, which is ridiculous because there is no draft law in effect. What happened is they brought forth a law. There was a group called the Tal Commission, and they formed a law based on that. They got basic agreement from the religious segments of society, and they're supporting parties. It's not representative, but it's supporting parties, and that was the law that was passed. As a matter of fact, that's what your brother went into the army on. He went into Nachal Haredi on the basis of that structure, and then 2 years later, right, somebody protested that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that law is not representative or something. It's not equally balanced, and so they canceled it.
I think it's the concept of Torato Emunato, the Torah is my faith, that basically you can get an exemption by being a kollel younger man or a yeshiva bacher. Some people use that, I'm talking about yeshiva bacher wise, to just not be able to go in and be able to work or do national service or start their lives because, by a certain age you're already getting married and whatever. But I think it's a differentiated of every person has to do army service and no one can get out of it. Okay, even for what their religious beliefs are.
You're saying that's what Lieberman wants? Or?
Yeah, basically, my understanding is there's two options. I think I'm completely wrong though. That there's this concept of okay, we're going to try and find a balance. Listen, there's a quota that has to be filled every year. There's nothing to do about it, okay? We need this X amount of soldiers to be able to protect the country and be able to support the country as needed.
Listen, that said, we also know from your brother's experience, you have multiple brothers that are going through the military, that one of the big arguments here is a cultural argument. It's not as much of, yes, there's definitely people that don't want to go in the army. There's definitely people that want to spend all of their time in religious studies. And I don't have a problem with that. I think a certain percentage of society should be focused on moral issues and religious issues, and that gives us a balanced society. However, the army in Israel is also one of the great cultural assimilators, right?
So here's the question, for example, there's many, if you want to say leftists, or Arab supporters, and they very much are against drafting. I mean, they're what's called Sarvanei Giyus, okay? Or they're in the IDF, they're serving in the IDF, and they're very against the IDF.
These are, I think the term in English is a conscientious objector, meaning they object to service.
So they not only object to service, but they're all out against the army, or they're we agreed to something that did good for the IDF, and then they're no, we shouldn't have agreed to that. We shouldn't have made that move. Just as there are religious people arrested for not showing up at the draft office, there are non-religious people in Tel Aviv and Haifa, in all types of places all the time as well. But they're dafka Sarvanei Giyus because we think the poor Arabs suffering in Gaza, and so they think that basically by joining and being in the IDF, they're committing war crimes or something of the sort.
So you have this mix of different positions that turn this into a ridiculous situation, right? There's a certain percentage of the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community, which would do service if the army offered them service. But the army...
I think it would...
Hold on, let me just finish that one statement. But the army doesn't just want service, they want service with a culturalization. So, in other words, if it was go, put on the uniform, learn how to fight, right? And when you're not fighting, you've got time to learn Torah. If you want to learn Torah, you've got time to go to synagogue when you're not in battle or whatever, God forbid, right? Then they would be fine. But then the army goes along and he says, no, wait, we have to have concerts with female performers. And we have to have situations where you're going to be in mixed gender situations that don't actually need it. There's no military requirement for that.
So I agree with you that there's a specific gender issue. I think that there's an army culture as well. But if they want to entice people, there can be incentives. There can be incentives of if you do military service, for example, you'll get a 50% discount on your mortgage, or you'll get better kiftat yeladim when you have kids.
By the way, I actually think they tried to do some of that. That was 2 or 3 laws ago, which were invalidated. And part of the complaint was, wait, you can't offer people incentives because then other segments of society aren't getting those incentives.
Well, that's the whole point of an incentive, no?
Well, so you've got this is kind of like the issue in the States of trying to right discrimination. If you right discrimination, you're discriminating now against the opposite of what you were discriminating against previously.
As discrimination, if you want to entice someone to do something, if you're going to get a contractor for your house, right? And if for an extra 5,000 shekel, he's going to throw in, I don't know, painting your walls with a nice fancy design and whatever. You're incentivizing him by offering that extra money to be able to do a better job. I think it's the same thing with IDF soldiers. Come and do service, get these benefits. These are the benefits of protecting your country, okay? They do give benefits now when you get out of the Army, but, I mean, you have 5 to 7 years to use them. It's not always explained very well. It's not easy always to access them. It's a bit of a crazy process.
So there's a segment of Haredi or religious society that would go in the army. And by the way, the Arab segment of Israel, because they are Israelis, they don't go in the army, and they're not required to do national service, but somehow that's not discriminatory or equal. That doesn't make any sense, but that's like an issue of, no, we don't want to address that as a society. You could incentivize people, and there's a segment that wants to go in, but the Army hasn't done a very good job.
I will agree with that.
On making the environment comfortable. Even though they have created religious units, it's still pretty problematic.
I think that there's a fight, I think, between the Army Rabbanut that is trying to create and make an environment possible for religious soldiers. Doesn't matter what level of religiosity, to be able to join and be able to have things in a functional way. But then there's, like, for example, commanders or bases that are not necessarily accommodating to it. There's people that feel like it's... And
when we say accommodating, we're not talking about particularly significant things. What we're saying is, well, you can change over your kitchen from these products to those products. When people aren't on duty, they should be in range. They should have availability of the synagogue. These are things that are there. It's just you have to make them a little more available. And then suddenly this whole section is more ready to serve. And they're like, no. Culturally, you should put up with it. Well,
see, as we know, the religious community doesn't want to put up with the cultural, excuse me for my language, bullshit. But on the other hand, I think that the religious people joining now are putting up with a certain level of it and are paving the way in a way. I mean, even though since Nachal Haredi was founded, it's at least been 10 to 15 years, okay? And like this past year for Yom HaZikaron was the first time that they had like a tekes for Nachal Haredi soldiers.
What a tekes is a ceremony.
Yeah, they had a Memorial Day ceremony. It was completely religious with rabbis. I think if the IDF went to like Rosh Hashivas and said, listen, you're going to have your, let's say, 20% that do really well. Okay, they're going to be the next rabbis, the next shochtim, the next people that you go ask questions to, whatever. They're the serious learners. But the guys that, I'm not going to even call them ADHD, that don't have the patience to sit on their toches all day and learn 8 to 12 hours, put them in the army, but come with us so we can build like a support system. Okay?
Yeah, hey, why can't the Rosh Hashiva come and give a shir on base every week? Or every day at the end of the day. He can come and give a shir after the unit's done all the fighting and everything else they need to do. They can accommodate him, give him a base pass.
Exactly.
He can come on and stick with his guys.
Or, that they're in a support system that they're familiar with and a system that they know how to work. The Army is its own system. So, of course, you'll have to learn the Army culture on a certain level and the Army system. But to have something that you're familiar with to lead you through, so to speak, I think that would change the way things work. And it would also give rabbis insight into certain issues that need to be addressed of religious soldiers, like questions about what you can do on Chag and Shabbos, what your job requires you to do, teaching you, listen, you might not think something is necessary pikuach hanefesh, and it really completely is. And for you, for example, saying, no, I'm not going to use the walkie-talkie on Shabbos, or I'm not going to carry my gun, it is an absolute necessity in the job I'm doing.
So part of the problem here, though, is, interestingly, the number of portion of religious society that was getting involved with the draft was going up pretty high. It was growing every year. It was over the 50% mark of those that were potentially eligible, and then the court got involved. And the more the court got involved, the more it became a religious society and cultural thing to push back. Because we're not going to let those seculars push us around. And historically, it was dangerous to do so, as there was a lot of pressure on the religious segment in Israel to move away from their religion, so they did have to push back.
No. So listen, I agree that if we look historically at since the founding of the State of Israel, what it did to the religious community, that the religious community had to specifically protect itself. Okay, it had to go out of its way to do so because of how the non-religious community and the state were out to get it. And now what's basically happening is that there's a segment of the religious Haredi community that is a bit more modern or a bit more open-minded, if that's the right way, or they're just out of options. Like people need to support their families, people need to support their wife and 2-3 kids that are sitting at home. People want to have some meaning in life and whatever, and they're not necessarily ready to jump straight into university or working. And the Army is something that builds you up and gives you some time to, I guess, reflect on life, figure out what you want to do, and that you can gain a lot from. And so they're like, let's go do service. It's also like nationalistic reasons. For example, like they're very rightist. They love Eretz Yisrael. You've grown up your whole life learning about it. Okay, you're very passionate about it. Let me take that passion and do something with it.
So do you think that Lieberman and the current coalition failure is more about trying to ignite a cultural war? I mean, here we got a cultural balance problem. It's been swinging back and forth for the last 5, 6, 8 years. A little more towards the Army, a little more away from the Army, a little more accommodating, a little less accommodating. One of the big changes they made was changing the law. So once you have your Army exemption, 2 or 3 years later, you can go to work, where previously you had to wait 10 years.
Yeah.
Which
ridiculous, completely ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it turned a whole segment of society into scofflaws.
Exactly.
So, do you think that Lieberman is trying to get more niche power? He's trying to create a culture war?
I don't know if he's trying to create a culture war. I will say that during the last election for the 21st Knesset, he did have many ads against religious people. Like there shouldn't be, for example, kosher food on base, or there shouldn't be a unit like Netzach Yehuda. And I think there's the mistake, because if you're going to try and accommodate these people, if you're going to want to get a segment, if it's like 5 or 10% or even 15% to be able to do the Army and whatever, you're going to have to make those accommodations.
And truly, it's not really an accommodation. You use the word accommodate, and I want to stop you there, because I think that's a problem. I think the term is a problem. This isn't about accommodating the religious in Israel. Listen, if you're a Jew in New York City right now, 40 or 45% of the children in school are religious. So if you're a Jew in New York City, the next generation is going to be 50% religiously observant, Jewish.
Okay.
And the generation after that, of course, will be 75 or 80%.
You're saying that each generation the percentage is gaining higher.
I'm saying that
the majority now
in Israel, the average Haredi family is 7 children. The average Dati Lumi, that's call it modern Orthodox, that family size is 5, which means in Jerusalem, 35 or 40% of the children in school in Jerusalem are also, actually I think it's higher in Jerusalem. But again, it's the same statistic happening. So while the religious percentage in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox, were in the 10 to 15% range, that's going to continue to grow. And the religious, which were in the 30% range, is also continuing to grow. Which means over the next generation and a half, the majority of the country will be somewhat Jewishly, religiously observant. That's a big shift. That's not accommodating. That's changing because your country is changing. By the way, just like in the United States, right now the United States, as we know, is going full tilt woke, whatever that means, right? And, yesterday's news, Martin Luther King, a very important cultural icon of the United States, who basically prevented the United States from having a type of civil war, okay, and properly accommodated the rights of a big segment of society that have been severely treated wrong, has now been discovered to have done many not nice things. Okay, many not nice things and therefore, are his statues going to be torn down? Are his street names going to be changed? I don't know. That's American business. And where American culture is going with all of its weird shifts is its own problems. Not one that we're going to certainly solve from over here in Israel. But Israel's also changing. Changing perhaps in the opposite direction of America becoming more morally conservative and more religiously oriented.
So here's the problem. Currently, most of the leadership is not. Okay, and listen, it takes time. It takes people, to, for example, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, someone learning to be a lawyer and getting into law and being appointed to be in the Supreme Court, getting into Knesset, etc. It takes a generation or two.
It does, and it's the same.
And so the mindset hasn't changed. I think on the street, on a certain level, it has, okay? But the overall country mindset hasn't, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah, I guess you could relate that kind of in the United States also, where you see that most of the congressmen, are in their 60s and 70s, if not 80s.
So they can't relate to their people anymore.
Well, so they're farther away, and if they don't spend more time at it, you certainly have interesting divergence of what these people think is important or trying to deal with versus where everyone else is at. That's why, I guess, in many ways, it's so funny about that Congressperson Cortez.
Yeah.
The young woman who keeps going out with all those crazy statements.
Did you know that cow farts are detrimental to your health and will make your car blow up and your...
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Anyway,
it's taking things to the other extreme, but hey, she does the same thing in her own way.
We got enough of. There's enough craziness in Israeli society. We don't need to worry about what's going on in the U.S. Anyway, have a safe trip to Kever Yosef. Have a great time, and come back and hopefully we'll talk about it a little bit, and you can share some information about visiting the tomb of the biblical patriarch Joseph. I know last time you went, you mentioned it got a little interesting as some of the local Palestinians decided to violently confront the IDF force.
That type of stuff happens all the time. Like, I've been there and, like, I can't breathe and I'm choking because literally there's pepper spray and tear gas in the air. And I've been there, and I've been on buses that have been stoned, literally. The bus
but they're armored buses.
Yeah, they are armored buses, but still. I've been there, like, when we've been delayed entering Shechem because they killed 2 terrorists or there was a shooting. We don't always run into what is going on the other side of Shechem, but if I wanted to know what an Arab state would look like from the PLO and Hamas, then all I need to do is go once a month into Shechem and see the burning tires, the rocks on the street, get the videos on WhatsApp or Telegram, from the Arab side of Shechem of the updates of the wonderful protest against Jews coming to pray, which, by the way, is in the Oslo Accords that we should have free right to be able to go and pray at Kever Yosef. We should have to be able to sneak in.
You're clearly under a mistaken impression here that Jews should have rights. And unfortunately, I think the world seems to disagree with you. Thankfully, God seems to say otherwise. Anyway, have a safe trip.
Thank you.
Bring us back some video or audio clips, and we'll see if we can do this again. If you appreciated this, please leave some comments, and maybe we'll set up a way to support it if we do this a couple of times. Thanks. And shalom and brachot from Eretz Yisrael.
Non-copyrighted podcast and music. Ay,